She walked into the most classified hangar in the United States carrying nothing but a toolbox and a badge nobody bothered to read. The pilots laughed. The ground crew ignored her. And the most advanced fighter jet on American soil refused to fly for anyone until she opened her mouth and spoke. If you love and respect the people who work in silence and let their results do the talking, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is for every person who was ever underestimated. The morning fog was still sitting heavy over the Mojave Desert when Dr. Maya Chen pulled her truck into the back lot of Edwards Air Force Base at 5:47 in the morning. She parked in the unmarked contractor section, the same spot she had used for the past 3 weeks, and she sat there for a moment drinking the last of her gas station coffee before grabbing her toolbox from the passenger seat and heading toward Hangar 19. Nobody greeted her at the gate. The security guard barely glanced at her credentials before waving her through. She was used to that. She had spent most of her adult life being waved through doors by people who had no idea what was on the other side of them. Maya was 39 years old. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and had the kind of face that people described as quiet, the kind of face that did not demand attention in a room, but somehow always knew exactly what was happening in it. She wore the same thing every day to the base, worn mechanic coveralls and Air Force gray, steel-toed boots, and her black hair pulled back in a tight bun with a few strands that always managed to escape by midday. She carried no rank insignia. She wore no medals. She had a Pentagon contractor badge clipped to her left breast pocket that said simply Chun, M, and below that a clearance code that, if anyone had actually taken the time to look it up, would have ended the conversation about who she was very quickly. But nobody looked it up. They saw the coveralls. They saw the toolbox. They assumed. Inside Hangar 19, the atmosphere that morning was already tense before Maya even set her tools down. The F-35B Lightning II, designated as Prototype 7, had been sitting unresponsive for 4 days. It had failed every startup sequence attempted by the base's top technical crew. The avionics were showing clean diagnostics. The fuel systems checked out. The airframe was perfect. But the aircraft simply would not respond to initialization. It sat in the middle of the hangar like a sleeping giant that no one could wake up, and the pressure from Washington to get it airborne for its classified test run was growing heavier by the hour. Colonel James Reeves was the squadron commander overseeing the test program. He was a decorated pilot with over 2,000 hours in fifth-generation aircraft, 2 combat deployments, and the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of being the most capable person in whatever room he entered. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with silver at his temples and a jaw that always seemed to be set in a position of mild displeasure. He stood at the center of the hangar that morning with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on Prototype 7 like he was waiting for it to apologize to him personally. Behind him stood his 2 senior pilots, Captain David Holt and Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Holt was sharp, competitive, and had never once in his career lost an argument about aircraft systems. Webb was younger, quieter, but equally certain that whatever was wrong with Prototype 7 was something the technical team should have already fixed. The 3 of them had been briefed that a Pentagon contractor would be coming in to look at the integrated voice command architecture. When they heard that, Holt had raised an eyebrow and said, and I quote, "They're sending someone to talk to it?" And the room had laughed. It seemed reasonable to laugh at the time. When Maya walked in, Holt saw her first. He watched her cross the hangar floor carrying her toolbox, weaving between the ground crew with practiced ease, and he turned to Webb and said something quiet that made Webb smirk. Neither of them introduced themselves. Colonel Reeves noticed her arrive, but said nothing either. They had 4 days of frustration sitting on their shoulders, and a contractor in coveralls was not high on the list of things they were interested in engaging with. Maya did not mind. She set her toolbox down next to the aircraft's forward landing gear, pulled out a tablet device from inside the box, and began walking a slow circuit around Prototype 7. She was not running diagnostics in the traditional sense. She was observing. She ran her hand lightly along the fuselage near the sensor array panels. She crouched down and looked at the underside of the aircraft near the lift fan housing. She stood at the rear and studied the exhaust nozzle for a long moment. The whole process took about 12 minutes, and she did it in complete silence. One of the younger ground crew, a specialist named Torres, leaned over to his colleague and whispered that she looked like she was trying to read the plane's mind. His colleague whispered back that she looked like she was trying to figure out which bolt to tighten. They both kept their voices low, but the hangar had good acoustics, and Maya heard every word. She said nothing. She finished her circuit and walked to the cockpit access ladder. Colonel Reeves finally spoke. "You need someone to walk you through the cockpit layout?" His tone was not mean. It was the tone of someone who genuinely believed they were being helpful in the way that people are helpful when they assume you need help. Maya looked at him for the first time. "No thank you, Colonel," she said. Her voice was calm and even and carried no edge whatsoever. She climbed the ladder. Reeves looked at Holt. Holt shrugged. Inside the cockpit, Maya did not touch the primary controls. She connected her tablet via a hardline port hidden beneath the left instrument cluster, a port that most people did not know existed because it had been installed during a phase of development that was not included in the standard technical documentation distributed to base personnel. She ran a read sequence for about 90 seconds, studying the output on her tablet, and then she disconnected the hardline and sat quietly in the seat for a moment. What she found was not a mechanical failure. It was not an avionics glitch. It was not a software bug in any conventional sense. What she found was something she had actually anticipated as a theoretical possibility 18 months ago, when she was still in the design phase of the system she was here to evaluate. The voice command authentication architecture, which she had personally engineered over the course of 4 years, had entered a protective lockdown state. It had done exactly what she had designed it to do under exactly the conditions she had designed it to do it under. 3 weeks earlier, someone on the base had attempted an unauthorized access sequence. The attempt had failed, but the system had registered it as a potential breach event and had quietly, without alerting any of the technical crew, shifted into its highest security protocol. In that protocol, the aircraft would not respond to any voice it had not previously authenticated at the highest clearance tier. There were exactly 3 voice profiles registered at that tier in the entire program. One belonged to the program's lead test pilot, who was currently on medical leave in Virginia. One belonged to a Pentagon official who had retired 18 months ago and whose profile had been administratively archived but not properly deactivated from the active system, which was itself a problem she would need to address in her report. And one belonged to Maya Chun. She climbed back down the cockpit ladder. Colonel Reeves was waiting at the bottom with his arms still crossed. "Find anything?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She walked past him to her toolbox and set her tablet inside. Then she picked up a small handheld device that looked to the untrained eye like a signal calibration tool. She walked back to the cockpit ladder. "Are you going back up?" Reeves asked. "Just for a moment," she said, and climbed back in. She did not use the handheld device. She set it on her knee and she leaned forward slightly toward the primary voice interface panel, a matte black panel just below the heads-up display framework that had no visible controls on its surface because it needed none. And then Dr. Maya Chen spoke 2 words in a clear, steady voice. The F-35B Prototype 7 came alive. Every system in the aircraft initialized simultaneously. The instrument panel blazed with light. The heads-up display flickered and locked. The engine pre-sequence initiated with a low, building hum that filled the hangar like the first note of something enormous. The cockpit flooded with the blue and amber glow of active avionics, and that glow spilled down over Maya's face in the dim morning light of the hangar. And from where Colonel Reeves was standing on the floor below, it looked almost like she was being crowned. The hangar went absolutely silent except for the sound of Prototype 7 breathing. Then everyone started talking at once. Torres dropped his coffee thermos. It hit the concrete floor, and the sound cracked through the hangar like a gunshot. Captain Holt stepped forward from where he had been leaning against the wall and stood very still with his mouth slightly open. Lieutenant Webb pushed off from the wall and walked toward the aircraft without entirely meaning to, like someone being pulled by a current they had not noticed. Ground crew stopped what they were doing. Technicians looked up from workstations. The hangar chief, a 20-year master sergeant named Paulson, walked slowly out from behind a tool cart with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something he would spend the rest of his career trying to accurately describe at retirement dinners. Colonel Reeves said nothing for a full 10 seconds. He stood at the base of the cockpit ladder and stared up at the glowing cockpit and the woman sitting inside it. And for the first time in a very long while, Colonel James Reeves did not know what to say. Maya powered the systems back to standby, climbed down the ladder, and stood in front of him. "Who are you?" he said. His voice was different now. The mild displeasure was gone. Something more genuine had replaced it. Maya reached into her breast pocket and handed him her credentials. Not the contractor badge. The other credentials. The ones folded inside a slim black case that she had been carrying in her inside pocket since she arrived on base 3 weeks ago, and which not one person had ever asked to see. Reeves opened the case and read what was inside. His expression moved through several stages in the space of about 4 seconds. His jaw did not drop dramatically. He was too disciplined for that. But something shifted in his eyes, a recalibration, the kind that happens when a person's mental model of a situation is quietly and completely dismantled and rebuilt in real time. He looked up from the credentials. He looked at Maya. He looked back at the credentials. The case identified her as Dr. Maya Chun, Senior Principal Engineer, Classified Systems Division, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, Program Designation Voice Lock, Clearance Level Above Top Secret, with a project scope note that read, Primary Architect, F. 35 Integrated Voice Authentication and Autonomous Response Framework, versions 1.0 through 4.7. She had not just been sent to look at the system. She had built it. Captain Holt appeared at Reeves's shoulder and read the credentials over his commander's arm. His face did something complicated. The smirk from earlier in the morning was entirely gone. In its place was the particular expression of a man who was rapidly recalculating a number of things he had said out loud that morning and finding none of them favorable. You designed the voice authentication system, Reeves said. It was not quite a question. I designed the entire integrated response architecture, Maya said. The voice authentication module is one component of it. For how long? The initial design contract was signed in 2019, she said. We went into classified development in 2020. The version currently installed in Prototype 7 is version 4.6. I was brought in because the system entered lockdown and nobody on base had the clearance level or the technical background to bring it back out safely without risking a deeper cascade failure in the authentication core. Reeves absorbed this. You've been here for 3 weeks. Yes. In that time, you did not think to mention any of this. Maya looked at him steadily. I was observing the base's response to the system failure. It was part of my assessment mandate. I needed to understand how the technical team was approaching the problem before I intervened, because my report to the Pentagon needs to include an evaluation of base-level protocol when classified systems behave unexpectedly. The way a team responds to a problem they don't understand tells you a great deal about readiness. The silence that followed that statement was the loudest silence the hangar had produced all morning. Reeves handed the credentials back to her. He stood very straight. And what did your assessment find, Dr. Chun? She accepted the credentials and tucked them back into her pocket. I'll include it in my written report, she said. But broadly speaking, the technical response was procedurally sound. The failure was at the intelligence level. The team did not know what they were looking for because they did not have access to the information that would have told them what they were looking for. That is a classification architecture issue, not a personnel issue. My recommendation will reflect that. She said all of this in the same calm, even voice she had used since she arrived. There was no victory in her tone. There was no satisfaction at having been underestimated and proven right in front of a crowd. She spoke the way a person speaks when they are simply reporting facts, because to her, that was exactly what she was doing. But the facts were extraordinary. Over the next 2 hours, the full picture began to assemble itself in the hangar like a mosaic being built from pieces that had been scattered all over the room, without anyone realizing they were connected. Word traveled fast on a base, especially word of the astonishing variety, and by 9 in the morning, every senior technical officer knew that the woman in the mechanic coveralls who had been quietly working near Prototype 7 for 3 weeks was the person who had designed the brain of the aircraft. They knew that the aircraft had been in lockdown because someone had tried to breach its authentication system from inside the base perimeter. And they knew that the only voice in the entire program that could have safely resolved the lockdown without triggering an irreversible failsafe that would have rendered the aircraft permanently non-operational had belonged to a woman that half the base had assumed was there to tighten bolts. That last detail hit people differently depending on who they were. For Master Sergeant Paulson, who had 20 years of experience and had spent most of his career watching people get underestimated, it hit like confirmation of something he had long suspected about the way rooms like this one tended to work. He went back behind his tool cart and got back to work with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had just watched the universe correct itself. For Torres, who was 24 and still early enough in his career to be genuinely shaped by what he saw rather than merely confirmed by it, it hit like a lesson he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. He picked up his coffee thermos from the floor and stood there holding it and thought about all the assumptions he had made in the past 3 weeks about the quiet woman in the coveralls, and felt the particular discomfort of realizing that his mental shortcuts had cost him an opportunity to learn from someone extraordinary. For Captain Holt, it hit hardest. He was not a bad person. He was not malicious. He was simply a person who had spent his career being the most technically knowledgeable individual in most rooms, and that experience had built in him a certain architecture of assumption that he had never been forced to examine because it had never been challenged in a way he could not rationalize away. This morning it was not being challenged. It was being demolished. He found Maya near the front of the hangar around 9:30, where she was writing notes on her tablet, and he stopped in front of her. "Dr. Chun," he said. She looked up. "I owe you an apology," he said. She studied him for a moment. "What for specifically?" He told her. He told her what he had said when she walked in. He did not minimize it or frame it generously. He said it plainly, the way she had been speaking all morning. And he said he was wrong. And he said he was sorry. It cost him something to say it, and he said it anyway. Maya looked at him for a moment after he finished. "I appreciate that," she said. "I genuinely do. And for what it's worth, Captain, your technical instincts during the troubleshooting process were actually quite good. Your team was running the right sequences. You just didn't have the information that would have told you why none of them were working. That wasn't your failure. That was a gap in the classification structure." Holt nodded slowly. "You're very generous." "I'm accurate," she said, and she went back to her notes. What nobody knew yet, not even Colonel Reeves, was that the story was not finished. The breach attempt that had triggered Prototype 7's lockdown had not come from outside the base. Maya had known this since day 2 of her 3 weeks on site. She had known it from the digital signature embedded in the access attempt, a signature that pointed not to an external intrusion, but to an internal terminal. A terminal that was registered to someone with an active security clearance, someone who was still on base. She had not reported this yet because she was still building the full picture, and because she had learned long ago that in situations like this one, the most dangerous thing you could do was move before you understood the complete shape of what you were dealing with. She had spent 11 years working in the most classified corners of American aerospace development, and in that time she had learned that the people who reached for the alarm the fastest were usually the ones who let the real problem escape in the confusion. She reported her findings on the breach to the base commander at 1,400 hours that afternoon in a closed meeting that lasted 40 minutes. She presented a 17-page preliminary report she had prepared on her tablet, complete with the digital trace data, the terminal identification, and a timeline of the access attempt that she had reconstructed from the system logs embedded in Prototype 7's authentication core. Logs that only she knew how to access because she had written them. The base commander, a 2-star general named Whitmore, read through the report in silence. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at her over the desk. "You've been carrying this for 2 weeks, he said. 17 days, she said. "And you said nothing." "I was still working," she said. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. "The individual identified in this report holds a TS/SCI clearance." "Yes, sir." "This is going to be a significant situation." "Yes, sir." "I included a recommended containment protocol on page 14. He turned to page 14 and read it. He looked up. "This is thorough. I've had time to think it through," she said. What happened over the next 72 hours was something that the base would process for years afterward in fragments of rumor and redacted reports. The individual identified in Maya's breach report was quietly removed from duty. A counterintelligence team arrived from Washington. Several terminals were examined. Several conversations were had behind closed doors that would never be fully documented in any file that anyone on base would ever be cleared to read. The details of what exactly had been attempted and why were classified at a level that placed them entirely beyond the reach of even the squadron commanders. What remained visible, what people on base could actually see and account for and talk about in the mess hall and the briefing rooms and the parking lot after shift, was this. A woman in mechanic coveralls had walked into a hangar where a $40 million classified aircraft sat non-operational and had resolved a situation that a full technical team had been unable to crack in 4 days. And in doing so had also apparently unraveled something far larger and far more serious that nobody else had even known was there. She had done it quietly. She had done it without announcing herself. She had done it while being ignored and dismissed and spoken about in lowered voices that were not quite low enough. And when it was done, she had written her report, handed it to the people who needed it, and gone back to work. On her last day at Edwards, Colonel Reeves found her in the parking lot by her truck at the end of the day. The sun was going down over the Mojave, and the light was that specific shade of desert amber that makes everything look both ancient and immediate at the same time. "Dr. Chun," he said. She turned around with her keys in her hand. He extended his hand. "On behalf of the base and on behalf of my squadron, thank you. What you did here matters. All of it." She shook his hand. "Thank you, Colonel. I have to ask you something," he said. "And you don't have to answer." She waited. "Did you know? When you arrived, did you already know about the breach?" She was quiet for a moment. The desert wind moved through the parking lot and stirred the loose strands of hair at the side of her face. "I had a strong hypothesis," she said. "The lockdown pattern was too specific to be a random system event. The authentication core doesn't enter that level of protective state without a real trigger. I knew something had happened. I didn't know exactly what yet. But you knew it was internal." She looked at him steadily. "I suspected. And you stayed quiet." "I stayed thorough," she said. "There's a difference." He nodded slowly. He seemed to be working through something. "Can I ask why you work the way you do?" "The coveralls. The anonymity. The 3 weeks without identifying yourself." Maya looked out across the parking lot toward the hangar line, where Prototype 7 was sitting inside Hangar 19 in the amber late afternoon light, fully operational now, ready to fly the test mission it had been grounded from for 4 days. "When people know who you are," she said, "they respond to who you are. They're polite. They're deferential. They show you what they want you to see. When they think you're the mechanic, they just act like themselves. And you learn a lot more about a system and the people running it from watching them when they're just being themselves than you ever learn from an official briefing." Reeves was quiet. "The aircraft is ready to fly," Maya said. "You should have a good test window tomorrow morning. The lockdown protocol has been fully reset, and I've updated the authentication registry. I'd recommend getting your lead test pilot back from Virginia as soon as possible and running a full voice reauthentication before the mission. I've left a technical brief with your systems officer." She opened her truck door. "Dr. Chun," Reeves said. She paused. "You should know. I looked up your record this afternoon, after the meeting with General Whitmore. Your full record, as much of it as I could access." She waited. "You've done this before," he said. "This isn't the first time you've come into a base in coveralls and found something nobody else could find." She smiled then. It was a small smile, the first real one he had seen from her in 3 weeks, and it changed her face entirely. "Take care of that aircraft, Colonel," she said. "She's worth protecting." She got in her truck and drove out of the lot, and Colonel Reeves stood there watching the truck until the taillights disappeared around the corner of the perimeter road and were gone. Inside Hangar 19, Prototype 7 sat ready and waiting in the quiet, its systems in standby, its authentication core updated and secure. Outside, the Mojave Desert was doing what it always did at this hour, turning slowly from amber to violet to the deep, star-filled dark that made the sky above Edwards Air Force Base look like something out of another world entirely. Somewhere on the highway heading back toward Los Angeles, Dr. Maya Chun was drinking another gas station coffee and already reviewing the preliminary notes for her next assignment on her tablet, propped against the steering wheel with the kind of easy focus that comes from a lifetime of doing exactly the work you were built for, in exactly the way you have always known how to do it. She had never needed anyone to know her name to do her job. She had only ever needed to know theirs. And she always did. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your life who works in silence and never asks for recognition, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Show some love to the quiet ones. This channel celebrates the people who build the world while everyone else is looking the other way. Now we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us, what part of the country are you watching from? Whether you're in Texas, New York, California, the Midwest, the South, or anywhere in between, let us know where you're tuning in from. We read every single comment, and this community is growing every day because of you.